Have you ever been to a forest? Whenever I visited a national park, I could feel the anticipation in the air. People waiting with bated breath for the tiger or leopard to come out. Imagine the scene, a dirt track running through a tunnel of leafless trees. The air is still, with nothing but the screaming cicadas to listen to. Two gypsies wait on this track. The reason for the wait known only to the guides. Suddenly, a sharp bark pierces the air. It is a barking deer. I heard the bark as if the guide. He replied with, "Alarm call tha, leopard. वो उधर शिकार कर रहा है." I was astounded, for all I had heard was a bark that to me just meant that the deer was probably chatting with its friends, wanting to break the silence. When the leopard did not show up, the guide decided to turn back and look elsewhere. But 2 minutes after we left, he frantically asked the driver to take a sharp U-turn and turn back, and we were just in time. The leopard ran across the road with a live cheetal in its mouth, dropping the cheetal's bloody tail in the road. My name is Reva Duraphe, and this is the story of curiosity. Throughout my childhood, I have been surrounded by instances like this. I was always told to observe, to feel the forest, to read it like a book, but I was never able to, for all I did was look. I looked, I heard, I smelled, but the forest remained mysterious to me. I always wondered how the guides had acquired these magical powers of understanding the forest. To me, it seemed an unachievable dream. The answer to that, it turns out, was remarkably simple. Experience. The understanding that our guide in Panna had of the situation had only come about through past experiences with hunting leopards, barking deer and deserted roads. But how does one gain these experiences? By observing. The only way to be able to read a forest is to open our senses to the nature and become one with it. Only then can you observe, only then can you gain experience, and only then can you use that experience to continue observing. Is observation really a useful skill? Sure, if you're a nature guide or a spy, one might say. But I think this example demonstrates how observation of our surroundings can be used as a very powerful tool, not only in nature, but also in our day-to-day lives, to help make inferences about a person, a place, or a situation that one wouldn't be able to make otherwise. Let me take another example. Visualize a bush about this tall with red flowers. At first glance, that is all one sees, a small bush with red flowers. Look closer and you see the design of the leaves and the shape of the flowers. A few butterflies alight on the flower. Observe the pattern on their wings and you might just notice that all of them belong to the same species. Observe the plant and you realize that this micro-habitat is an entire ecosystem by itself. Now the next time you see this plant, you look out for the butterflies that you saw the last time. Your past observation led to an experience, which gave way to further observation. Observation and looking are often used interchangeably, but they are far from being synonyms. Going by the dictionary definitions, looking is discerning something visually, but observing is to make an inference from that which is discerned. The other definition of observation is to detect something during the course of scientific study, which I fully understood only recently through a research that I conducted. I had seen slides of prepared samples under a compound microscope at school and hadn't thought much about it, except that it would be cool to have a microscope at home. But when I was introduced to the foldscope, which is a simple origami microscope with a lens in it, I could experiment with any samples that I wanted to. To check whether I had assembled the foldscope correctly, I put in a sample of pollen grains, since I knew what they should look like. The foldscope worked, but the pollen grains differed in structure from the ones that I had seen earlier. I had never even thought that something so tiny and seemingly insignificant would also have variations. This made me wonder whether there are more drastic variations in pollen grains. And as it turns out, there are. My introduction to the microcosmos led to the realization that just because something isn't visible to me doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. While this statement may seem so very obvious, it was only then that I became aware of the assumptions that we make about the world around us. I then set out on a short project to document these variations and find out why they exist. The aim was to find the answer from the internet and conclude the project. But luckily for me, I did not find an answer on the internet. So I decided to conduct the research myself, although I knew absolutely nothing about plants or pollen. This question was too vague to answer, so I decided to focus on specific aspects of pollen. My observation of over 100 samples helped me arrive at a specific answerable question. I had to learn basic plant taxonomy, go through similar research papers, not to forget the crazy obsession I developed with flowers, and of course, the fun I had. I had never done anything of this sort earlier. Had I found an answer on the internet, I would not have been able to embark on this amazing journey. I then began to wonder, if faced with a question that they can't answer, with no sign of an answer to be found easily, how many others would act the way I did? If you are curious about a topic, but can't find much information easily, how many of you will take it upon yourself to find an answer? And I don't just mean a scientific question, it could be absolutely anything. Or is it our tendency to just give up? To answer this question, I conducted a short survey. The results surprised me. Of the 124 people that answered, 78.2% said that yes, they would take it upon themselves to find an answer. This value was way higher than I expected. Well, I'm not the only nerd who's ready to do crazy things then. But to the 21.8% of people who answered no, what went wrong? Surely, all of us were curious as children, curious about a lot of things. Where has our curiosity disappeared? These days, our curiosity is being killed by the environment around us. Right from our childhood, we are told what to do, decisions are taken on our behalf, and every question of ours is abruptly answered. We are constantly nagged at, not allowed to be by ourselves, not allowed to take decisions for ourselves, without the parents or the child realizing. Even at school, the fear of asking a silly doubt and publicly embarrassing oneself overcomes the power of curiosity. This fear ultimately develops into a fear of failure to do something as per standards set by someone. It could be as simple as trying a new food. Whenever I go to a restaurant, I usually end up ordering the same selection of my 5 favorite dishes rather than trying something new, just because I fear that I won't like it. So what if I don't like it? At least I know not to order it the next time, and there is still a 50% chance that I will like it, which I tend to overlook. How many of us actually enjoy the learning at school? If you did not have to give an exam on the chapters, would you enjoy learning about them? We tend to focus on getting marks and miss out entirely on the process of learning. Another disadvantage that our generation faces is the excess of information available at our fingertips due to technological advancement. Of course, technology makes a lot of things easier, reduces the required effort, and saves a ton of time. But this effortless access to information has its disadvantages. It makes us lazy, both in thought and in action. This laziness gets us settled so snugly in our comfort zone that coming out of that comfort zone becomes a tedious task. Within that zone, whenever we set out to do something, we tend to predefine a pattern for the process, leaving absolutely no room for experimentation. Don't get me wrong, technology is an indispensable tool, but not to the extent that it becomes our only source of information. If a curious person is spoon-fed an answer to every question that they have, they will stop being curious. If a person realizes that Googling anything will yield an answer, why will that person take efforts to answer the question themselves? So, I say I was lucky not to have found an answer to my question about pollen grains, because had I found one, I would surely have stopped there. I believe that a continuous cycle is formed when a person is curious. Curiosity stems from observation and leads to a thirst for knowledge. In ideal circumstances, a thirst for knowledge leads to a greater curiosity, which again leads to observation. I like to call it the unending spiral. I found that the spiral kept repeating during my pollen research. My observation of the variation in pollen grains led to my curiosity. My thirst for knowledge took me to the internet, where I did not find anything immediately. So I started researching, got more curious, observed more samples, and found similarities. To gain knowledge, I compared them. Further observation led to obsession. I mean, a greater thirst for knowledge, and thus an attempt to answer my questions. And the cycle just goes on. The introduction of the internet, that is, easy access to information via technology, at this crucial junction, turns this beautiful cycle into a linear pathway, as the question is abruptly answered. Technology must be used to gain knowledge, but not to the extent that we become completely dependent on it for everything, to a point where we stop being curious and observant. The cycle too eventually leads to an answer, but there are so many questions being asked and answered at every step of the way that it never really ends. Through this, I want to demonstrate three things. 1. To observe is to be curious. 2. To be curious is to be thirsty for knowledge. And 3. To be thirsty for knowledge should not equal looking up something on the internet and stopping there. I ask all of you to try, at an individual level, to sustain the unending spiral. But remember that it is never ending. And after a while, you may find yourself at an entirely different point than where you started. But that's the beauty of it. And the aim is to enjoy the process rather than focusing too much on the results. Even if you don't end up answering your question, at least you know a great deal more about the topic than you did when you began. I don't know if I'll be able to answer my question about pollen, but I sure can rattle out a lot of facts about plants now. As Albert Einstein said, the mind that opens to a new idea never returns to its original size. Let us allow our minds to keep growing and never let our curiosity take a nosedive. Thank you.